Hello, I'm Dwight Robertson, founder and president of Kingdom Building Ministries. It's a pleasure for us to bring you this message. I've noticed over 2 decades of ministry that when our speakers show up at an event, God shows up too and moves in people's lives. I pray God will show up in your life as well as you listen to this message. You're about to hear a message entitled The Resistance from one of our itinerant speakers, John Vermilya. This message has impacted thousands of people in live settings. I know it will be used by God to help you become the kind of active kingdom laborer you long to be. And now, here's John.
I love history. Anyone else here love history? I'm going to tell you a little story from history. It's a true story. 1939, the world was being ripped apart by a war. There was a madman in control of Germany, Adolf Hitler, if you know your history. And he pretty much built this massive military machine and began attacking in all directions. He went through Eastern Europe first. There were some nations that just fell in a matter of days. They put up a great fight, but Hitler had massed this army, this absolute killing machine. And they attacked not only with soldiers and tanks on the ground, but in the air as well. And it was just a full court press. It's called a blitzkrieg, a new style of warfare came upon the world. And eventually he got around to attacking westward, and he invaded France in 1939. In 1939, France and England declared war on Germany and did their best to defend that nation against the invading armies of Germany. But in 7 weeks, all of France was taken over. In 7 weeks, the majority of the French army was forced to surrender. The English army had to retreat across the English Channel back into England to defend their own nation. France became occupied territory. France became occupied territory. It was a possession of an alien nation, a nation that didn't belong there. It was a nation that spoke a different language. It was a nation that had a different set of values. It was a nation that had a foreign government, different set of laws, the whole smash. Germany came into possession of France. They took over the police stations. They took over the government. They took over every part of that civilization. The French people became a conquered people. There was an invader that took up shop. This is 1939. I'm talking, of course, about World War II. In World War II, you know, the United States, we kind of took our time getting involved in that war. But eventually we did join. And the Allied nations began the fight to take back all of these nations from the invader, from the German invaders, from the Nazi invaders. Well, there were 3 groups of people that emerged in France during World War II. 3 groups of people. The first group of people looked around them and said, wow, there's a new sheriff in town. There's a new order to things. Look at these Germans. They're so strong. They're so powerful. Look at their army. Have you seen their tanks? Man, 7 weeks we were conquered. Boom, gone. They had to surrender. Not even the English could stand up. They had to, retreat through Dunkirk and go back across the channel. We got nothing. And this first group of people, after a couple of years of this occupation, kind of forgot who they were supposed to be. They forgot a little bit, I think, their identity as Frenchmen and French women. And this first group of French people, what they did is they said, you know what? We need to just accept the fact that the Germans are in charge. This group of people became known in France as collaborators. Because what the collaborators did is the collaborators decided to help out the Germans. Many of them were small business owners, and they began to do business with the German army. Gave them some good deals, gave them a bulk rate. Some of them began to try to provide information for the German secret police, just so they could maybe get a few extra food stamps, or maybe they could, get a deal or some special privileges or whatever. Many of these collaborators sold out their own countrymen who happened to be of Jewish heritage. And they said, oh yeah, that girl over there, she's a Jew. Yeah, she's French, but she's Jewish. And we know what the Germans did to the Jewish people, regardless of nationality. They were collaborators. They forgot their true identity. They forgot who was supposed to be in charge of France. And they sold out. S-O-L-D. There was a second group of French people that emerged during World War II. This group of individuals didn't quite sell out. I call them the neutrals. They were the vast majority of French people. They had lost sons and cousins, friends and relatives in the 7-week battle to defend France, and they too saw the power of the German army. They too saw how strong this enemy invader was. And they didn't necessarily like the fact that the Germans had come in and kind of imposed, their values on France. They didn't necessarily like the fact that they had been kicked out of their homes and that their army had been beaten and they had to accept a new government and, a new way of life. But this group of people, the neutrals, was like so many of us, like me, they were kind of afraid. They were afraid. They didn't really want to stand up to the Germans. I mean, come on, their army had been beaten, been forced to surrender. And so this group of individuals, they didn't collaborate, they didn't totally sell out their countrymen, but they didn't really do anything either. They just kind of tried to stay in the middle. Kind of like last night. Remember we were talking about dead faith? That's kind of like who the neutrals were. They just kind of, they listened to the radio and they heard the reports that the Allies were coming and, the Americans are in the war. And they wanted to hope that maybe the Allies would come and set them free, but they didn't have the courage to really do anything else but just kind of listen to the radio and just kind of stay out of everyone else's way. Don't make the Germans mad. Do you see what they do to the people that try to stand up for them? They could just be pulled out of their homes and shot right on the street. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sell out. But man, these radical, I don't want to be radical or nothing. Let's just everybody get along. And we'll wait and see. Thankfully, for world history's sake, there was a third group of Frenchmen and French women and French children and French old people that emerged. And these people looked around them and said, the invaders do not belong here. This is not how our country is supposed to be. And I would rather die than sell out. And I will not stand by and see my countrymen, Jewish or not, be marched out of their homes and off to death camps. And I may not have a lot. I may not be a trained soldier. I may have to go make my own weapons. But I'm going to resist. This group of individuals got their start with a group of students. A group of students soon after the German occupation of France. A group of high school students were daring enough to go downtown Paris to the Arc de Triomphe. Okay? And celebrate the French victory over Germany in World War I right out in the open. It was a public act of resistance, and it got a lot of them in trouble. But that resistance turned into something else, and pretty soon these little band of freedom fighters, the French underground, another name they went by was the Maquis. They began to organize themselves, and they started a campaign of sabotage against the German invaders. Unbelievable stories. At every opportunity, they did whatever they could to resist the German occupation. They blew up bridges. They sabotaged German military equipment. They carried out assassinations. There were little members of the resistance that would pop up out of manholes and take out a leading general and then disappear into the sewers. Little old French ladies, this is one of my favorite stories, where they're sitting at a corner on a little village road, and they see a German column of vehicles coming this way, and there's a sign that says Paris, 60 kilometers that way. And she turns the sign, so it says Paris, 60 kilometers that way. And it wasn't much, but she cost them 120 kilometers and wasted gas. Little kids that would shine the boots of German officers pretending to like these nasty invaders, and all the while listening to what they had to say as they talked to their fellow officers, then going back to their dads and their uncles and their friends in the French underground and telling them what they had learned. Some of those kids paid with their lives. Many of those people had lost their families or lost their homes or were imprisoned. But they resisted because they said the invader doesn't belong here. So you had one group that collaborated, that sold out, that accepted the invader. There was a second group that just kind of sat in the middle and said, you know what? Let's just wait and see. Let's not make anybody mad. And there was a third group of heroic individuals that were known for their graffiti. This sign, it originally wasn't peace. It stood for victoire, victory. And after the resistance would chuck some Molotov cocktails into another ammo supply dump, somebody would whip out some paint, put a big V there, which meant you may be the invader for a while. But the rightful ruler is coming back, and there will be victory. More about them in a minute. You guys, I believe we live in occupied territory. We live in occupied territory right now. We're in a war right now, and I'm not talking about the Middle East. I'm not talking about the global war on terrorism. We live in a far bigger war than that. This war has been going on since the beginning of time, and it's a war for your soul, and it's a war for my soul. I want you to turn to Revelation chapter 12. We're going to go into this deep and complex book because I think it paints a great picture for us in vivid colors what this invasion looks like. As you know, Revelation's a book of prophecy. Prophecy is not always easy to understand. The problem with prophecy is sometimes it looks back in the present and the future all at once. But it can paint the picture for us. The picture of this war that we're in right now. A war for our souls. We're going to take a little trip right here in Revelation chapter 12 into the unseen world. Into the spiritual world. Because that's where the war is at its most vivid. Revelation chapter 12, it starts like this. It says, a great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crowd of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven. An enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. In case you're wondering what we're talking about, that's the Christmas story. That's the Christmas story. The enemy did his best to stop the landing at Bethlehem of the liberating troops in the form of a baby. Jesus Christ. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Verse 7, and there was war in heaven. That's where it began. It began with that angel, that beautiful angel, Lucifer, whose pride got between him and his relationship with God and was cast down. And when he went down, he took a third of the angels with him. And the war began there, but it spilled over down here. And you and I are caught up in it. Now, you can pretend that there's not a war. You can pretend this is all fairy tale, or this is something out of the Matrix, or something out of the Lord of the Rings. But I'm reading it right here in Scripture that there was war in heaven. You and I are caught up in it. Second part of verse 7, Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Skip down to verse 13. Check this out. It says, when the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. Skip down to 17. The woman escapes, and in verse 17 it says, the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commands. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you obey God's commands. And what I'm reading right here is we have an enemy who's making war against us. We have an enemy. The problem is, most of us don't live with that perspective. Most of us don't live with the perspective that we live in occupied territory. We don't live with the perspective that there is a prince of this world and he's not Jesus. Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he's coming back. He came here, he asked us to start a movement of resistance. He promised us that he would return for that big liberation day. But most of us are living lives just trying to get along with the invader. Some of us have gone so far as to forget who our rightful king is, and we're collaborating with the enemy. Well, there's a war. Well, you and I have a part to play. Flip over, if you will, to Ephesians 6. This is a familiar passage. Not only is there a war going on, but you and I have a very important part to play. We're not just to be spectators. The author of Ephesians tells us in Ephesians 6, verse 10, he says, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Well, why would he talk about armor if we're not in a war? Why would he tell us to put on armor if we don't have a part to play? Why would he tell us to put on armor if it's okay for us to just sit this one out? Just play the wait and see game, to not get our hands dirty, to not get in the game, to not get in the fight. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle, I love this, is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Guys, I'm not a big, hocus pocus, we got a devil behind every bush guy, one of those people that just is always, in the do-do-do-do-do, that realm. But guys, spiritual warfare is real, and it's a battle for your soul, and it's a battle for my soul. There was about a month and a half period of time this last spring where everything but the kitchen sink was thrown at me. I just got, picked up and moved from Charlotte, North Carolina to Buckley, Michigan a year and a half ago. It's a long story. I won't bore you with it, but basically I'm on orders from on high, okay? All right, I got orders to move from wonderful, lovely, sweet tea drinking, barbecue eating, Charlotte, North Carolina, south of Mason-Dixon, 3 hours from the beach, 2 hours to the mountains, great church, great friends, lived there for 10 years, all my daughters born there, and I got orders to move to Michigan. Now, no offense to Michigan, but I'm pretty sure if I throw a rock far enough, I can hit Canada. It's cold. The snow starts flying in November. Am I feeling sorry for myself? Is that okay? Can I vent just a little bit here? The snow starts flying in November, and man, we were still getting flakes in May. Now, that's not right. I'm pretty sure it's not biblical either. So I'm living in this tiny town. There's not a Starbucks for 25 minutes. If you ask the waitress, is your tea sweet? She looks at you like you're from Mars. Barbecue means flipping hamburgers and hot dogs. Never heard of the stuff we had for lunch today. So I was already going into this situation kind of, not with the best, kind of heart attitude. But I was asked to start a ministry there. And I've been part of this work and, doing my best, trying to invest in some kids and invest in a church and invest in a community. And it seemed like at every turn, we were seeing great results. Kids were coming to Christ. People were getting serious about their faith. We built a youth center. We started a youth group. There were things that had never gone on in this tiny little town that didn't have a single Christian ministry for young people. And things were, chucking along. And then all of a sudden, stuff starts happening to me left and right. Some of it's personal. I don't even want to share. But financial stuff, personal stuff. Attacks against me, slander against me. I got a threatening phone call. A guy called, in 2005, a guy called my house and said he wanted to hang me. I had a student, get this, a student called me and asked me why I had to, why I was so concerned with all of the, the eternal destinies of young people's lives, and why don't you let those of us who want to go to hell just go to hell? Why don't you just leave us alone? I got that phone call. I had people saying things about me that I never did, saying things that I said that I never said, and I was feeling sorry for myself. I was down in the dumps. I felt terrible. It was like, can another thing go wrong? And then they started picking on my kids. My daughter's getting chased, around recess, and so we had to put her in Taekwondo class, but I'm not sure if that's biblical or not, but she's got a yellow belt, whatever, but she's the cutest yellow belt on the planet. I don't know if she can fight, but boy, she's cutie. But anyways, after about a month, it was like something hit me in the head, and I realized, John, none of this is personal. You're in the fight. I'm under attack. And I don't say that to puff myself up, because here I'm a pastor, I should know that. And it took me a month before I realized, oh, I get it. I'm dangerous. He's picking on me. And I realized, or was reminded of the proper perspective, that we're in a war, and I've chosen to obey the King of Kings and play a part in that role. It's a small part, but it's my part. And I had to remind myself to put on the armor of God so that I could take my stand. And the armor. It talks about stand firm with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, the breastplate of righteousness in place, with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. Take up the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, the word of God, and pray on all occasions. That's how we fight, because we're not fighting against people. The guy who called me and wants to hang me, he doesn't know any better. It's the enemy that's after me. That girl, that high school girl, that senior who doesn't want anything to do with God, I got to love her. I got to tell her, you know what? You may hate what I'm doing, but I'm, you know what? I'm following orders. Because I'm a member of the resistance. That's who I am. I'm a member of the underground. 1 Peter 5, verses 8 and 9 says that the enemy prowls around like a lion, looking for someone to devour. The enemy wants to devour you. You see, Satan lost. He and his angels couldn't even beat Michael and the angels. Jesus didn't have to get involved. He already's been beat down. So what is he doing? He's trying to take as many of us as he can. Historians say at some level, people think even though Hitler was a madman, most of his military leaders, if not he himself, knew that if the United States joined the war in World War II, there was no chance. It came down to mathematics. There was no chance. But it didn't stop him from exterminating over 6 million Jews. It didn't stop him from fighting to the last man in some cases, all the way down in Austria. That's the same mind as the devil. He's got to know at some level how it's all going to turn out. But you and I have a part to play. You see, we're in occupied territory, but we all have a choice. We can be neutral, we can collaborate, or we can get in a fight. One of my pet peeves with, kind of the church in general is that we spend all our time on defense. And a lot of Christians are happy to just kind of, get to know the Word and get involved in a church and kind of look at the world on the outside burn. That's incomplete. You got to go on the attack. You got to go on the attack. There are friends, there are relatives, there are people that you know that don't know Christ. And it's time for a member of the resistance to go free them. There are things that you can do. There are places that you're supposed to go. There are little, as my friend says, taps on the shoulder when God whispers and says, I want you to do something. And when you don't do it, you refuse to go on the attack. You say, you know what, God, that's too much out of my comfort zone. I would rather just be a silent member of the resistance. Don't tell anybody. And he's sitting there going, I armed you. I showed you how to defend yourself. And now you're not going to get out of the foxhole and ride to the sound of the guns? When you love someone that's hard to love, you go on the attack. When you minister to someone you don't really feel like ministering to, you go on the attack. When you serve someone, you go on the attack. Sure, when you share your faith, you're on the attack. When you get involved at your youth group, you go on the attack. That's what a member of the resistance does. The question tonight is, whose side are you really on? I want us to flip back to Revelation for one final vivid picture of this battle that's in the spiritual realm that we're caught up in. It's in Revelation chapter 19. You see, what it really comes down to, my friends, is whether or not you really believe that Liberation Day is coming. We don't preach about that much anymore. About Jesus coming back. Do you really believe that Liberation Day is coming? Or are you one of those folks that says, you know what, this world ain't all that bad. This could be home. It's okay, the Prince of the Air, he seems quiet. Every time every once in a while there's a 9/11 that kind of shakes us up or something bad. But for the most part, we live kind of, mundane, numb lives, forgetting that we're in the middle of a war. Well, I believe that the rightful king is coming back. Eventually, the Allies liberated France. It took years. They were invaded in 1939, and it wasn't until 1944 that the Allies landed at Normandy. A few months after that, there was this amazing picture of liberation in the capital city of Paris. Have you seen any of these? Like if you're up late at night like me watching it on the History Channel, and you see, going through, you see the tanks, the Allies, they're coming through Paris. And the people, the French people, just came flooding out of their homes and they're cheering, they're going wild. You guys, it was like 5 years of occupation. 5 years of an invader with a different language, different set of values, terror, murder, rape, pillage, you name it. Businesses, homes, property destroyed. And now, Liberation Day was here. Guys, I've read about and I've seen these pictures. It was a great day. It was a horrible day. It was a great day because the Germans were leaving. They were in full retreat. People were dancing in the streets. You see those pictures of, French people hugging on Allied soldiers, giving them a flower, giving them a drink, giving them some food, giving them some chocolate. Soldiers picking up kids, riding on the tanks. The band struck up. Those famous pictures of the French girl, dipping the American soldier. Thank you for liberating us. But in the midst of that celebration, there were some terrible parts too. It was a great day. It was a horrible day. There were lynchings all over Paris, and there was nothing that the soldiers could do about it. Because those that had collaborated with the enemy got what was coming to them. It was a little bit easier for the females who collaborated. Many of them weren't hung or shot. Instead, they were stripped naked. A swastika was carved into their forehead, and their hair was shaved, and they were forced to march out of town carrying their babies that they'd had by German soldiers with them. You collaborated. You sold us out. Liberation Day is coming for us as well. Who will you be on that day? You know, I've always wondered how the neutral folks felt on that day, especially when the lynchings began. When they saw these people over here and then they saw the members of the resistance who were so excited, and they kind of sat in the middle and said, what did I do? Revelation chapter 19 and verse 11 gives us a picture of the end. The author says in verse 11, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is called Faithful and True. With justice he judges and makes war. His eyes are like blazing fire, and on his head are many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one knows but he himself. He is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Out of his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh he has this name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You guys, one day, the sky's going to split, and we're going to see that picture. The rightful king is coming back to set things right. And that is a kingdom perspective. That is not fairy tale. That is God's word. My question for you tonight, my question for me is, how will that rider with the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, how will he find me? Will I be a collaborator? Will I be one of these people that's just kind of like, oh, good, I'm glad he won. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to make anybody mad. Oh, I hope he doesn't talk to me. Oh, I hope he doesn't look at me or ask me what I did. Or will you be crawling out of a manhole with a machine gun and a Molotov cocktail covered in mud going, yes, I was waiting for you. I want to be that guy. I want to be that guy who says, we've been working for you. We've been preparing the way. We did everything we can. We've been sabotaging. We've been blowing stuff up. We've been going on attack, not just defending. You armed us. We've defended ourselves, and we've been on attack. We're members of the resistance. We're members of the underground. But right now, I just want you to close your eyes. Please bow your heads. And I want you to honestly ask yourself which one of the three people you are that I've laid out this evening. Are you a collaborator? Have you been dabbling in sin? Have you been accepting the ways of the world? Have you been saying, you know what? What's it hurt? What's it hurt to have this relationship with the enemy? Have you been a neutral person? Yeah, you want God to win. You're a believer in Jesus, but you're sitting on the sidelines. You're letting other people do the fighting. The statistics are shocking how few people are involved in churches today. We have ministries that are underfunded. We have pastors that can't even, make enough money to eat because people aren't giving anymore, because people have sold out, have collaborated with the world. They've bought into the American dream. We have missionaries that can't go to the field because they either are under-supported or there's not the infrastructure to send them over there. We have more people that need to hear the gospel and not enough missionaries, it seems, than ever before. And not to mention that guy or that girl who lives across the street who you know that doesn't know Christ. The only way it's going to happen is if there is a movement of people who says, I am willing to risk everything and join the underground. I'm going to resist the devil personally, and I'm going to get in the fight. And it takes commitment. And you know what? There's no guarantee that you'll make it through alive. But it means great reward for when the rightful king comes on that white horse. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be? This is what we're going to do. If you know, we're going to give you a chance to respond here in a second. If you know for a fact that you're a collaborator or have collaborated, the great news is the King of Kings will forgive you. There's going to be no lynching tonight, I promise. But set it right. Don't be on the wrong side. If you know you've collaborated with the enemy, if you've let the invader get inside your head and it's time to say, I'm not selling out anymore. I'm taking a stand against sin, all those secret sins in my life. I'm taking a stand against my lackadaisical attitude. Then when we ask, I want you to come. I want you to come right up here or find someone to pray with, but we want you to be hardcore. We want you to ask God forgiveness for selling out. Ask Him to take you back into the resistance. If you've been a neutral, and my gut says that there's a lot of us here that are neutrals. We know we haven't been in the fight. We know we haven't done our part. We haven't played our part. Then you have some business to take care of as well. There's plenty of room. With your head bowed, your eyes closed, I want you to read something. The resistance had a little newspaper that they circulated during World War II. Little flyers that they would hand out everywhere. And in 1943, this was a flyer. Listen to it. I think it's so appropriate. It said, of course, in French, that victory is approaching. But there are still Frenchmen who have done nothing to hasten this event. Warning, there is not much more time. It is not enough to listen to the radio from London or to read our circular. One must fully involve himself, take risks, be ready to fight. In the new France, and I say in the new heaven, a man will be judged by his acts. We are accepting workers of the 11th hour. Soon, it will be noon. Whose side are you on, guys? If you know that you're not a member of the resistance and you want to join, we're having a recruiting party right now. You come as they sing.